All right, here we are with our third installment on Hinduism. This may be our last video on Hinduism. I'm not quite sure. We'll see how far we get and how long it takes. I don't want to rush through it too fast, but since we haven't had any participants, none of my students have shown up for these Zoom meetings for extra credit. They've gone by pretty quick, so we're pretty close to the end of all the stuff I'd like to cover from the Hindu chapter in our textbook. There's some readings that I have available from the Bhagavad Gita that we're also going to cover, but there's already a discussion posted on that on our website. So this will maybe, perhaps, put a pin on that. Maybe the last video. Perhaps there might be one more short part 4 to this, but if there is, it will be pretty short. This video, as this first slide suggests, is particularly devoted. Well, I wouldn't say the whole thing's devoted. Probably half of it will be devoted to talking about the epics, the Hindu epics, which were mentioned in earlier parts of this series. These are considered by scholars, and I would say rightly so, they're considered some of the more important Hindu texts as far as texts that are important to the actual practitioners, your common everyday average Hindu, someone who goes to the temple and celebrates the festivals. They're going to be most familiar with these epics. So that's going to dominate this lecture, but we'll also get into the caste system. We'll talk about the Code of Manu very briefly, and probably just finish up with some terminology from the chapter, basic Hindu terminology that we haven't got to yet, we've never covered, and maybe a few things about holidays and festivals and contemporary political issues in Hindu. So I don't know, that might all fit on this video, that might not. Let's go ahead and get started and see how we do. As I said, right, we're going to start with the epics. This is a painting which is actually a depiction out of the Mahabharata, which is the second of the two epics, the first one being the Ramayana. So we'll get into this eventually, but before we get into the actual epics themselves, let's talk a little bit about some Hindu cosmology. Now, within the Hindu cosmology, there are these four ages, and within those ages, there are 2,000 cycles. And the idea is that, in these epics are a depiction of, there are these long narrative poems. They're depictions of the supreme God intervening at different periods within this cosmic cycle. Right? They're these national myths and legend, and a lot of people think that they were written in response to Jainism and Buddhism, that these traditions developed during those same time periods as a response to those emerging traditions, I guess as a competitor, you might say. But they're very nationalistic. They're filled with patriotic hymns to the homeland, and again, they always involve some form of the supreme coming down to earth and intervening during different periods of the cosmic cycle. Um, so the supreme is always represented as a person with human-like qualities, and two of the great epics I've already mentioned are the Ramayana and the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Right, these are the two major epics in the Hindu tradition. So more about the ages, the four different ages. The idea is that there's these cycles, right? Again, each cycle, they've got the numbers super precise here. I'm not sure how the rishis figured this out, but I'm sure there's some mathematical formula behind this. But there's a cycle is 4,320,000 years, and every 2,000 cycles equals 1 day in the life of Brahma, now the creator God, right? He sleeps and wakes up, and that's 2,000 cycles. Each cycle divides into 4 ages, and again, there's these ages that keep recurring, and the first one is the good one. This is when everything is right and in order with the world. This is the Dharma age. The moral order is natural. The second yuga is when people are not already right. They're not already naturally in order morally. They have to be taught the Dharma. This is the cow on three legs. And the third one is the Dark Age. This is where the revealed values are not recognized. All the ancient teachings are starting to be lost. And then finally, there's Kali Yuga, where the world is at its worst, the cow on one leg, as they say. And apparently, we're in the middle of the last one, Kali Yuga, right? We all get to live in the dark, even the darker than the Dark Age, right? This is the world at its worst. And I find this rather fascinating. All the traditions that we live in that have this notion of a cosmology like this, where things get better or worse, they all think that we're in this bad cycle right now currently. Like the world is horrible and it needs to get back to this original order, right? I mean, you can argue Christianity says a similar thing, right? Islam, Judaism, not exactly the same thing. They're not a cycle that repeats itself. There's a beginning and an end to them, but it's always out of this, this perfect state. Everything's great, and now it's all gone to hell, right? But it'll be reestablished as something really good eventually. Okay, so this is the theme that you'll see that recurs throughout a lot of these traditions. It's not just Hinduism that has this notion, but they're very specific here, right? With the different types of ages, the length of the ages. But again, because of all this turmoil and turbulence in the cosmos, occasionally the Supreme has to come down and take the form of a hero and save us. Okay, so Ramayana, again, this is the earlier of the two. This is probably, I don't know, maybe this is the more popular one. Westerners are perhaps more familiar with the Mahabharata here in America, just because that's the one that includes the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, the Bhagavad Gita is probably one of the most popular Hindu texts in the world, and that one comes from the second epic, the Mahabharata. But as far as I can tell, and the Hindus I've talked to, it seems like the Ramayana is the more popular and the more practiced or celebrated, reenacted of the two. But they're both very important. I don't want to downplay the importance of the Mahabharata, but again, it seems like the Ramayana has a more dominant place in Hindu celebrations, festival, practice. Okay, so what is the Ramayana about? What's the basic plot line? Obviously, we can't get into the whole thing. It's a super long, epic poem. Both of them are very long. They contain many books, and much longer than something like you would read in Homer or Hesiod in the Greeks, right? So the Ramayana is supposed to be this eternal play of good and evil, right? These forces that are always balancing each other out. And this battle, or this battle involves some incarnation of Vishnu. That's the idea, is that Rama here, our hero, is an incarnation of Vishnu. It is supposed to be sort of this depiction of the proper enactment of duties. All the heroes in it, all the characters in it are supposed to represent some sort of ideals. The ideal servant, the ideal brother, the ideal wife, the ideal king. So Vishnu comes down as Rama, and he comes here to save us from Ravana. Ravana is this evil demon king of Sri Lanka who kidnaps this princess. Sorry, who kidnaps the wife of Rama. And there's this monkey Hanuman, right? This is a very popular character. If you ever see a monkey depicted in a Hindu temple, most likely, especially if it's not just a monkey, but a monkey with all this ornamentation, it's almost assuredly it's Hanuman, right? Who is like Rama's sidekick here, right? They go to the island of Sri Lanka, which is south of India, there to save the princess Sita from this evil demon Ravana. Now, the Mahabharata, and this is the one that people make a lot more out of here in the West, but as I said, as far as I can tell, the Ramayana is the more popular of the two. This one's even longer, though. It's more than 100,000 verses, and it depicts this long, epic struggle between these two royal families. There's a big split. It's almost like a family feud between these two factions, and they are warring for control of the kingdom. Now it's near modern-day Delhi, sort of northern India. It's supposed to teach the importance of duties to sons, the duties of kingship, and also the benefits of asceticism, right? Depriving yourself of earthly pleasures in order for a higher duty, and for for more intellectual or spiritual pursuits. It talks about righteous actions. One of the main characters. Uh, um, I was just going to say Vishnu, but no, it's Arjuna. Arjuna is sort of this warrior prince who is supposed to be this righteous man, and we learn about the qualities of the gods, the qualities and the aspects of the divine. That's one of the most famous passages from the Bhagavad Gita, which is right in the middle of the Mahabharata. It's this battle scene where you've got Arjuna facing the crowd. He's facing the army across from him, and his charioteer, right? This is what's pictured here. The charioteer is actually supposed to be an incarnation of Krishna. And remember, we talked about Krishna in the last video. Some Hindus think that Krishna is also Vishnu, but it doesn't really matter. It's a god, right? It's Vishnu, Krishna, Krishna himself, if he's his own god. And he's the charioteer of Arjuna here. Arjuna is hesitant to fight because he looks across the battlefield, and remember, this is a family feud. These are families that are warring. They're split, and he's looking across the battlefield, and he sees all these men who he loves that used to be his brothers, who used to be his teachers, who he respects, and he doesn't want to fight. And Arjuna tells him, no, you must let go of your worldly attachments to these people. You must fight. You are a warrior. It is your duty. You will be reincarnated as something greater. They will be reincarnated as something greater because they're fighting for their duty and all this stuff. So this is probably, like I said, the most famous Hindu text. People use it in the West a lot, had a big influence on Gandhi, still has a big influence on, I would say, modern Hinduism, especially in the West, as it's been exported to other countries. Probably not so much as it is traditionally practiced in India. I'm not sure that this episode, this story with Arjuna and and Krishna, is that as big as it is here. It's just a very iconic scene that, again, like I said, it's very popular. The biggest, as far as I know, the most popular text in Hinduism, right, is this one chapter out of the Mahabharata known as the Bhagavad Gita. So the idea here is that, like, the Ramayana is, it shows these ideals, the ideal servant, the ideal wife, and the Mahabharata is more honest about human nature. It depicts the world as it truly is, all sides, not just the ideals. So one primary ethic that you're supposed to get out of the Mahabharata, apparently, and this is I'm getting a lot of this from the textbook, but I wouldn't be putting it here or saying it if I hadn't corroborated it elsewhere. The one popular interpretation is that the main message here is that happiness of others, not just your own happiness, is essential, right? If you don't make others happy, you are going to be miserable. You're going to drag yourself down with the world. It's not going to work out. So you have to learn how to honor things besides yourself, something higher. Okay, believe it or not, oh wait, there's a picture here before I move on. I was about to move on to the Puranas, but before we do that, let's talk about this image that I have here. This is also a scene from the Bhagavad Gita. Once Arjuna finds out that it's a holy, it's a deity, Krishna, who is his charioteer, he implores Vishnu to show him his true form. I want to see you as you truly are. I want to see you as a god. And Krishna says, I can't do that. It's too much. It's too overwhelming for you. But I will give you the next best thing. I will show you as close as possible to my true form as you can bear. And so this image here is supposed to be a scene, from the Mahabharata when he does that. It's a beautiful passage, by the way. I think it's the most poetic passage of the Bhagavad Gita, where he describes his beauty and this vision that he has of the divine. But again, it's always in some form that is not pure and true, but in a form that he can understand or he can take. This reminds me a bit of, the story from the Old Testament of Moses and the burning bush. This is a typical trope we find throughout a lot of religions, a lot of these world religions, is that the divine can't be seen directly. It has to take on these other forms, these incarnations, as a sort of go-between in order to communicate to the mortals, right, to us human beings. Okay, so the Puranas, right? These are some poems. They're Sanskrit, like most of the Vedic literature, so they're written in Sanskrit, that ancient literature. These were composed a little bit later than the epics, but not much. We think that they were, you know, around 500 CE to 1000 CE was when they were originally composed. And there's 18 of them in total, 6 for each of the major deities. Remember, we talked about that triumvirate, the major, you know, the 3 big Hindu gods. There's way more than that, but the 3 sort of triumvirate, the main ones, the Vishnu, who's the preserver, Brahma, the creator, and Shiva, the destroyer. So there's 6 for each of them. But really, the ones, honestly, the ones with Vishnu that I'm aware of, at least the more famous ones, are really about Krishna. So technically, I don't know. If you believe that Krishna is his own deity, then maybe Vishnu doesn't get a full 6. Anyway, they are, again, these poems. This is a little scene, right? This is actually obviously Krishna being a naughty little boy. There's all these scenes of him being mischievous and running around the fields. And there's his mother, this beautiful maiden, who's taking his flute away. Krishna, you can't be playing in the fields, playing your flute. You've got to come and do your homework, right? I guess maybe it's what she might be saying in this painting, right? But again, they're ways, these poems are ways of popularizing the more abstract teachings of the Vedas. These are much more popular forms of Hindu, the Puranas and the epics. The most well-known is the Bhagavata Purana, and this includes the life story of Krishna. Maybe that's why maybe that's the only one I've read. I didn't know that's what it was called, the Bhagavata Purana, when I was, you know, when these stories were recounted to me. But this is the one that has Krishna as a kid, right? He's a much-loved child, very mischievous, very carefree. He steals the hearts of the gopi girls, right? I didn't get any pictures with the gopi girls. I thought I did. Well, the gopi girls are these little maidens. Oh, there they are in the background. I guess you could see. They think he's so cute and adorable, and they love him. And when he goes off on his little journeys, they get all sad, and they're freaking out. And when he comes back, they're happy. And the gopis are supposed to be this model of bhakti worship. We talked about bhakti yoga in the last lecture. They are supposed to be the perfect models of this emotional devotion to the divine. So let's look at some terminology here, and we're going to move on to the caste system. It looks like we're doing really good on time. I don't think we're going to need to do a 4th lecture on Hinduism. I didn't elaborate on the epics as much as I thought I would. Maybe I should have. I don't know. Yeah, the textbook has a lot of information on the epics, and in fact, I even have, again, a section from the Mahabharata, the famous one, the Bhagavad Gita, that we're going to cover as well. So I don't know, maybe I don't feel so bad for skipping over them, but just really quick, a pause here. We're going to look at some terminology, right? You know, when it comes to different ways of practicing Hinduism, obviously there's certain rituals. Keep in mind, we don't use that word here in a derogatory sense. It's not a pejorative, like satanic rituals, right? We'll talk about Christian rituals, right, for those Christians out there. So don't get offended. We're just talking about something that's repeated, a repeated practice that one does if you're a member of this religion. And one of the most important forms of ritual in Hindu is puja, right? That's literally just means worship, right? Public usually is the connotation, but it could be private puja or home puja. If you go to like the temple, they might have a small room with a statue of your deity that your patron deity. You go in there by yourself or in small groups, you know, do your thing, do your worship, do your devotion, then move on. The next person comes in, does their devotion. Or in a large group, right, you'll have a big crowd, right? There's the sort of public puja worship, but then there's also even a home puja, right? Darsan, pujaris, that's the person who is performing puja. That's what that means. Brahmin is a priest, okay? That's very confusing terminology, right? We've already talked about Brahma, the creator god. Brahman, this notion of the divine, like the whole entire cosmos, everything that is, all the deities, all of us, it's all Brahman, right? We're all one. You know, the whole universe, in a sense, is a deity. It is all God. We are all God. We are not separate, right? So there's Brahman, there's Brahma, but now there's Brahmin with the I in here. That's the name for a priest. It's also the caste, the higher. We haven't got to the caste system yet. We're going to do that next. But the Brahmins are the priests and the philosophers at the top of the caste system. In this context, though, we're talking about puja. The Brahmins are the ones who are in charge of like the public rituals, the public, you know, they might be carrying the incense, they might be leading the chants if there's a chant going on, a mantra. something like this. Again, darsan is supposed to be consecrated food, holy food. Um, Oh, sorry, wrong. Prasad is that. Darsan is the word for it's basically like the it's a visual representation of the divine, right? So the statue of Krishna, the statue of Vishnu, Shiva, whatever, that is Darsan, right? That image is supposed to bring you to the presence of the actual being, right? So and again, prasad is sacred food that has been sanctified by being offered towards the gods. Havan is a sacred fire, right? It's a sacred fireplace. Oftentimes, they'll put fruits, dried fruits, fragrances, burnt offerings there to the deities. Um, there's a little bit in your book about death ceremonies that I do want to read before we move on to the caste system here. So let me actually find. I think it's page 99 is the passage I'm about to read. So it describes sort of the typical, we're talking about ritual, right? So let's talk about the cremation ceremony because they go into detail about it here quite a bit. Again, this is at the bottom of page 99 of the textbook, and she writes. Let me get a sip of water real quick. Dry mouth here. She says, so death ceremonies are also carried out by fire. Obviously, there's cremation. We talked about this before, right? Like some Sakti worship, they thought that the widow should be cremated with the husband as a sign of devotion, right? To be a good Hindu for her caste duties. So anyway, death ceremonies are also carried out by fire, as the body is cremated soon after death, carefully washed, rubbed with fragrant sandalwood paste, and dressed in fresh clothes. It is wrapped in white sheets and carried on a wooden stretcher to a burning ground. Male relatives and well-wishers place flowers on the shrouded body, and then logs are stacked around it to make a fierce fire. Pandits may chant Vedic verses designed to cleanse it and assist the soul's release from the body and its passage to the spiritual realm. The senior mourner, usually the eldest surviving son, carries a clay pot of water around the body 3 times, gradually pouring out the water, then dashes the pot to the ground, a dramatic and emotional moment, signifying the end of the earthly body. It is also he who then lights the pyre. Alternatively, the shrouded body may be placed in an electric crematorium. Once the burning of the body is complete, survivors take the remaining bits of bone and ash for ritual immersion in the waters of a holy river, right? So, eventually it's cast to the river. I'm glad I read this. I was going to skip it, but I'm glad I read it. I was going to jump forward and try to just finish everything, get this all knocked out in a video. We'll still be able to, I think, finish everything. I'm pretty much done. Got like a page left of notes of stuff I want to make sure that I cover right here. So, but I'm glad I read this because it reminded me of a time when I actually went to go visit a Hindu temple, and the way they had everything organized, the men were separate from the women, right? You notice here the male mourners are the ones that sort of are at the forefront. They're at the front of the funeral. I guess they don't mention the women in this passage, but I'm assuming they're behind, they're in the back. That was how they were. That was how the worship was going. I was with my date and I were at this temple. It's beautiful, beautiful temple, by the way. The Sri Swaminarayan. I highly recommend if you live here in the Houston area, just look up Hindu Temple Sugarland. It's out actually in Stafford technically, but out by Sugarland, just a little bit outside Houston. It's a beautiful hand carved temple. It was an open air temple, but I think the elements here in Houston make it really hard to keep it clean and maintained. So they unfortunately had to cover it with glass. But it was originally an open air Sri Swaminarayan Mandir. Mandir is a type of a temple and is beautiful. I'd go out there, but I'm getting sidetracked here just talking about the place. My main point in mentioning this story, again, I went there with a date of mine, and we were, looking at this place, and they were having one of their ceremonies while we were visiting the temple. So we had to separate. They had all the men up in the front, and the women were all in the back. And it was a really short. They had like 3 or 4 prayers or puja, I guess you should call it, ritual throughout the day. There's a schedule on their website. And it's very short. They do some chants. They come out with their incense, and they open up I guess what you would call darsan, the darsan, right? The visual contact, because there's these images of these wise gurus and these holy men that are covered up during most of the day, but during the ritual the doors are open so that the practitioners can see them, and so they're then they offer money or incense or whatever to them. They chant and pray and bow. But it was interesting because obviously they've got all the guys in the front and the women in the back. This is something that you'll find in other traditions as well. It's not unique to Hindu, this sort of segregation. And the idea is that the men will be distracted by the women, right? The women are in the front. The women are in the front. The men are going to be distracted checking out the girls when they should be focusing on their spiritual duties and I guess being respectful to the gods and all this sort of thing, and worshiping correctly, doing their puja. But it was funny because my date, after we were done, we were like talking about it, and she said that all the girls were talking about the guys, like all the ladies in the back were like giggling and gossiping about all the boys and which boys were cute and all. And so that was kind of a funny story, right? So it's sort of like this assumption that ladies don't check out the guys too, okay. But anyway, let's move on. This is a picture here of it's really a Vishnu as the Purusa, the eternal or cosmic person. Remember, we talked about one of the earlier forms of Hindu philosophy was Samkhya, which maintained that there's Prakriti and Purusha, these two elements of the universe. One of them is the material, one is the actual cosmic, real, spiritual, the higher. That's Purusa, the eternal self. This is an image of, I guess it's Vishnu. It looks like Vishnu to me, or maybe Krishna as Purusa, as the eternal man, as the cosmic man. Now, the caste system originally, goes back to the Vedic age, so it's a very old system. What is the caste system? Well, the idea is that this cosmic man was sacrificed at the beginning of all time, and he was chopped up into all these different parts for some reason, right? He had to be sacrificed. There's a few different accounts for why this is the case. He must have been split up, but his mouth became the Brahmins, who are the upper class. His arms were the Kshatriya, they're the warrior class. The thighs became the Vaishyas, which are the farmers and the merchants, and the feet were the Shudra, who are the manual laborers or the artisans, right? So those are the different castes. And again, each of them is supposed to be one part of Purusa, this cosmic man. All together, they make up society, right? Out of all the teachings of Hindu that people here in the West are familiar with, the caste system is probably the most controversial. I guess if I want to come to the defense of it, I would have to say that don't we have a class structure here in our country? Maybe we're just not honest about it. We try to act like we're equal, but aren't there sort of classist systems in place here? The caste system, some of its defenders try to say that, look, it's become hereditary. You're born into it, right? If your dad's a Brahmin, you're going to be a Brahmin. If your dad's a Kshatriya, you're going to be Kshatriya, right? But originally it wasn't. The idea was almost sort of, if you've ever read Plato's Republic, Plato argues that each of us have a different type of personality. And he tends to oversimplify it. For Plato, there's really three castes, not these four castes, right? In Plato's Republic, you're either a warrior, a merchant, and producer, or you're a philosopher king. So for him, it's like some of us are intellectuals. We're intellectually curious. We like to learn. We like to know as much as we possibly can know, just because we like to know. That's it. Other people worry about honor. They want to have everybody appreciate them, and they want to work hard for their society and get sort of a pat on the back for that. They love honor, so they should be warriors. And then other people have this natural tendency towards accumulating wealth. They just want to get stuff. That's all they care about, is making stuff, being productive, and creating wealth. So those are the personality types according to Plato. So for each of those, they'll correspond a different thing to do. you know, society has different roles. We all have different roles to play, and it all fits together in this moral order. So I guess the caste system is a similar idea. That's the argument that a lot of Hindus will make, is that, look, it's just people are naturally they gravitate towards these things. But the problem is, though, again, this has become something strictly hereditary. It's not just that, oh, well, you were born a Shudra, but you're so smart and you're good at your Vedic literature and you can learn Sanskrit, you're going to move all the way up to the Brahmins, right? That's usually not how it happens in the real world, right? The Hindu caste system is pretty hard and rigid. It's become, like I said, hereditary, and marrying in between caste is kind of seen as bad. It's bad karma. You know, it's bad action. You don't do it. It accumulates karmic energy that makes you be reborn in a lower caste. So the idea is that you do your duty, right? Stay in your caste, stay a manual laborer, but just be a really good manual laborer. And then when you get reborn, maybe you'll become a warrior. You'll move up a couple castes. And if you're a really good warrior, or a king or a politician, then maybe you'll be reborn as some holy man who just sits there and meditates in some temple all day, or you know, in some ashram. So that's the sort of idea behind the caste system. Again, it was, you know, they argue that originally it wasn't hereditary, but it's become that, right? And really probably the most controversial aspect of it, I haven't even mentioned yet, there's even this caste that's below the four, right? The Chandala is a name for someone who disposes of corpses. That's somebody, you know, you're not even supposed to talk to them. Dalit is the word for untouchable. That's what we'll call them in the West, the untouchables. They remove human waste and corpses. They sweep streets. They do the jobs that no one ever wants to do. And in 1948, this category of untouchability was abolished by the Indian Constitution, but it still persists today, right? So it's something that still lingers on today. You know, Gandhi was very sympathetic towards these people. He actually called them Harijans, which means children of God. And so he did a lot to try to advocate for them, and to say these guys are just, they are outcasts, they're pariahs, and they do such a important, vital function to society, and yet nobody has social contact with them. They're treated so horribly, right? So again, another very controversial aspect of the Hindu caste system. So I mentioned the Code of Manu before. This is another later work. It comes after the epics and the Puranas, but not much further after. I think actually your textbook has it earlier. It says 100 CE. I always thought it was more 4th century. I guess I could be wrong. Maybe my memory fails me, right? But I'm looking at my notes here, and it says 100 CE. So in the Code of Manu, we've got all sorts of things going on here, like sort of the basic Hindu ethics. We've talked about some of the, I guess, the cosmological beliefs, the belief in reincarnation, the cycle of birth and death. Now we talk about the caste system. But this is further developed, the caste duties and things like that, what you should do to be a good member of your caste. This is all in the Book of Manu, the Law of Manu, the Code of Manu, depending on which version of translation you pick up. So you know, you hear about, you know, how to be a proper ruler, the proper dietary restrictions, what you're supposed to eat, what you're not supposed to eat, how you're supposed to get married, who you're supposed to get married with, your daily rituals, how to practice your rights, you know, to the gods, all the social laws, how to treat people in society, and it condemns the untouchables. So again, this is a pretty, you know, a pretty controversial notion here, right? In the Book of Manu, it's like condemns them. They have to live outside the villages. They have to eat from the sewer, or drink from the sewers. They can only eat from broken dishes, I think. What else do I have here? Only wear clothing from corpses, like leftover clothing. But it does prescribe charity. If you're upper class and you're rich, you have to, you know, give money. That's like a duty to like give some of your money away. So hospitality is actually considered a duty to everybody, to open your home to those who need it if in desperate desperate times. Also, another thing that maybe I wouldn't say, I've got here listed sort of the life stages of the typical Hindu. I would say this is something that's definitely not followed to the letter. You know, it's not like Hindus are like, oh, I'm 25, I need to start becoming a householder. But this is kind of a general pattern that most Hindus might try to follow in their life. Male Hindus, by the way, too. The female's completely different, right? This is the male, right, who's born, who's trying to work his way up this sort of cosmic cycle and up the caste system, right? So here's how he should live his life, right? These are the sort of life stages of a Brahmin, really, of like an upper class Hindu, right? So moksha, right? Remember moksha from the first lecture. Moksha is the Hindu word for liberation. You're liberating yourself from that cycle of reincarnation. So that's the goal here of this practice. Like, why do you organize your life this way? It's supposed to, you know, get you through these get you through the cosmic cycle and maybe even achieve moksha. If you're a Brahmin, if you're in the highest caste of Hindu, it's kind of considered that you're pretty much like, if you do it right and you play your cards right, you're going to get out this time, right? This is your last life, right? You're not going to be reincarnated. So it's actually a good sign, period, that you're born a human, right? At least you're born a human, like you're at least somewhere on the caste system. You're not some animal or some plant or some piece of mud or something like that. Your existence is at least like that dignified to be human, so they consider that a good thing. But a Brahmin would be best, right? If you're born into a Brahmin caste, an upper caste, and you follow this prescription, these life stages according to the Book of Manu, then this is how you're supposed to really break that cycle, right? And then when you die, you're not reincarnated, you become one with Brahman, right? The Atman, the self, becomes one. Its true self finds its true nature, that it's at one with the universe, that it is God, just like all of us. We're all one, right? So again, this is the sort of typical, not to the letter, typical life cycle according to Manu, right? The first 25 years of your life, you're a student. After that, you're what's called a householder. That's the householder stage, where you're supposed to, basically you get married, you raise a family, you do actually look for wealth and worldly goods, and that increases over 50, right? You have some fun, 50 to 75, you slowly detach yourself from your worldly pursuits, right? This is like, getting ready for retirement. If you reach the ripe old age of 75, after you've been kind of preparing, you've been reading books, you've been reading your Vedic literature, now you completely withdraw from society and you become what's called a sannyasin, right? Now that's I guess you might call him an ascetic monk, somebody who completely cuts themselves off from their wife and their family and just spends the whole day contemplating Brahman, contemplating the oneness of everything. There's a sannyasin in the documentary that I posted on D2L. If you watch that documentary, 330 million gods, right? It shows this man who lives in a very small room, and his wife comes to visit him once a day, but he never talks to her, doesn't even look at her. She just goes there to make sure he's okay and leaves a little bit of food for him or something, right? He has become a sannyasin. He's withdrawn from society, and he's getting ready to enter into the divine. And some of them do this together, right? The man in our video is doing it a solo, but sometimes all these sannyasins will join an ashram, right? So that's a community of ascetics. So they all sit together and do their Vedic chants and their meditation and just focus on that, that final goal of liberation. Okay, so I've said enough about the Code of Manu, the Book of Manu. Well, let's just start wrapping things up here. We're pretty close to the end of our exploration of Hinduism. Next week, we're going to do Jainism. Right, on Friday, I'm going to do Jainism. I don't think I'm going to do these meetings anymore for extra credit. No one is showing up, and it's really kind of a pain in the ass for my schedule. I don't have any days off because of this. I'm basically working 7 days a week. And so since nobody's shown up on these Friday and these Sunday meetings for extra credit, I mean, if nobody shows up, there's one at 7 tonight that I'm not even going to have. But I'm just going to see if anybody tries to show up. And if they don't, I'm just going to wing it. I'm going to do it from now on my own terms and probably get these videos out a lot faster. So that's the one plus of that. Won't have any student interactions, but we'll get these videos out pretty quick. So the full series will be available probably in a couple weeks if I end up doing it that way. Okay, so let's, again, like I said, let's wrap things up. I'm just going to mention some of the holidays and the festivals that they have in your textbook, right, that they have listed. Really, the only ones that I know about, like I've actually been to some of these. Like I went to go to the Holi celebration and the Diwali celebration here in Houston, right? Holi, they paint you with all these colors. Diwali is sort of the festival of lights. But let's just sort of, let's just run through these. There's officially 16 religious holidays, official ones, but because of the diversity of Hinduism as a tradition, if you go to India, there's pretty much a religious holiday about every day, right? So Lohari is where people are supposed to throw away your evil into a bonfire. It's this big, kind of reminds me of the Jewish holidays at Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. I think Rosh Hashanah is where you go around. It's a part of Yom Kippur. I'm so bad at that. I always get those two mixed up. Where you go around asking for forgiveness and all the bad. You think about all the bad stuff you've done and harm people, and you go and you apologize and you ask for forgiveness. It's kind of like that, right? So Lohari, again, you think about all your evil and burn it in the fire, right? Holi, this takes place at the end of winter and the coming of spring. It's very colorful, right? You get all painted up, your face. Naga Pachama, this is devoted to snakes, right? Nagas, they're considered powerful and sacred in Indian culture. There's also, I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation, Jamustami, which is Lord Krishna's birthday. Ganesh Chaturthi, right? Ganesh, obviously we talked about him with the elephant head. That's to celebrate his life. It's in honor of him. I think it takes place at the end of the summer, towards the end of the summer. So maybe remember he ushers in new beginnings. Maybe that's, kind of appropriate timing for going back to school. I don't know if they intended that. There's Durga Puja, which is, or sometimes it's referred to probably more technically, or more often referred to as Dussehra, which is the triumph of good over evil, right? And I think that's where they'll actually be performing a lot of scenes from the Ramayana, right? Because that's kind of the theme, one of the major themes of the Ramayana is this triumph of good over evil, the cycle of darkness being overcome by this state of light and dharma and cosmic order. And of course Diwali, which is the most celebrated by non-Hindus. A lot of people that don't know anything about Hindu, if you live in Houston, you might know the Diwali because of the festival. It's a big deal. They have these huge celebrations at all the Hindu temples, right? So that's the festival of lights. Very beautiful, spectacular. Afterwards, it's quite a mess, though. If you go to these temples, all the fireworks, if they're sort of, I hate to be the person that has to clean up after all that stuff. Okay, well, let's see. I don't think there's anything else. Oh, Hindu identity. I got one last slide to go here. So again, just a few comments. She elaborates on this in the textbook, but there's the sort of this dichotomy you find in Hindu practice, which is quite interesting, controversial. There's this reverence for the environment, especially the Ganges River is this holy river. But I was watching him just recently. I think it was on PBS. They did a news story on the Ganges and how horrible the pollution in that river was. And the story was actually talking about industrial waste. But even during Hindu festivals, where there's all the fireworks and they will construct all of these the darshan, the visual representations of the divine, all these huge images of Krishna and Shiva, whoever they're celebrating. And when they're done with some of these festivals, they'll throw all the leftover, even the darshan, even like the gods, like the statues of the gods, they'll just kind of throw them away and just litter in the river, right? So that's a big problem. So even though like in a lot of the books and a lot of the teachings, there's this reverence and love for the environment, in practice, it doesn't always come out that way. Also, this is kind of, I guess, pretty prescient, right? They talked about this in the 7th edition of the textbook, and they mentioned it also in the 9th edition, but the Hindu nationalist movement is taking pretty big foothold in Hindu politics. In the West, you live in America, you don't get a lot of foreign news. I like to go watch the news overseas. So I've been following this a little bit. I'm no expert on it, right? But the Prime Minister Modi, right? He's considered by many to be a hardline Hindu nationalist and not very, some of his policies are not very friendly towards Christian and Muslims. There's also a lot of strife going on at the border there of China and India in recent weeks. So and again, that probably has not a lot to do with religion, but more just sort of territorial disputes. However, though, like I said, Pakistan, India, all these animosities, a lot of them have to do with sort of this conflict between Islam and Hindu, and this notion of Hindu national identity trying to reassert itself, and in the process, some would argue depriving many Muslims of their rights under the Hindu constitution. And just last but not least, this passage from the textbook. I guess I should read it. This is at the very end of the chapter, towards the end of the chapter. The Indian Supreme Court, they ruled, or they actually, I guess, gave a sort of a definition of Hinduism, and they seem to assert a more universalist interpretation rather than an exclusivist interpretation. You remember those vocabulary words from chapter 1, right? Universalist is sort of more accepting. If you're a universalist faith, you might think that, well, our system is true, but theirs is as well. There's a saying, there's many different paths up the mountain, right? Some people go up this path, some people go up that path, but they all lead up to the same summit, right? The same mountain peak. That's a more universalistic approach. But then there's the exclusivist approach, where it's like, no, we're right and they're completely wrong, and they're going to be damned to whatever place our gods are going to damn them to. So I'm gonna read this this passage from the Indian Supreme Court that defines the basic concepts of Hinduism, and this is on page 115 of the textbook. And I think this is where we'll end the lecture. Let me read it, and then I'll maybe make some closing remarks. So again, the court defined the basic concepts of Hinduism as: one, acceptance of the Vedas as the highest authority in religious and philosophical matters. So all those ancient texts, they're the authority for religious and philosophical things. Two, a spirit of tolerance and a willingness to understand and appreciate others' points of view based on the realization that truth is many-sided. Three, acceptance of belief in an endless succession of vast periods of creation, maintenance, right? Creation, Brahma, maintenance, Vishnu, and dissolution, Shiva, of the world, right? So these cycles, things come and go and change, new things are built, old things crumble, and are reborn into new, greater things, right? Belief in rebirth and pre-existence, right? So reincarnation. Number 5, recognition of many ways or means to salvation, right? Many paths up the mountaintop. There may be many gods worshipped, and there are Hindus who do not believe in worshiping idols. All right, so even though some Hinduism may seem as idolatrous, all these symbols and idols and sculptures and figurines, and they're worshiping and they're giving them fruit, but then there's the more austere. So Hinduism can be both those things. It can be the more contemplative, meditative, detached from anything visual, or it can be the more sensual forms of Hinduism. And last but not least, there's no definite set of philosophical concepts, unlike other religions, right? So it's not a strict, hard doctrine. It's a fluid, vibrant, diverse, many-faceted, many-sided tradition, right? And I got to give it its credit. I think that Hinduism in general, in world history, has been pretty open to other belief systems. That's what's made Hinduism what it is today, I think. That's why it's so hard to study and it's so hard to define, because it's so diverse, because everything that they, sort of as the, I guess what is called the Indian nation expanded into territory and became this great country it is today, with billions, millions and millions of people, one of the largest populations in the world. It allowed all these traditions to be included under that same umbrella. It really isn't until, I guess, the Muslim invasions, right? I think like 5th, 6th century, when I guess you might point to Hinduism, and maybe the British too, to be fair. The British probably even had a even bigger hand in this when we're talking about modern Hindu nationalist movements. But I think in a broader context, Hinduism does seem pretty universalist. So they seem to have practiced what the Supreme Court is preaching here, the Indian Supreme Court. But we'll see if in modern times, with all the sectarian violence and the rise of Hindu nationalism, we'll see if Hinduism can maintain its reputation as this all-embracing, many paths to the mountaintop, sort of ideology that it's espoused for years. So, anyways, I think that's the last slide, and yes, it is. And I think that's about all I really wanted to say for this lecture. That's all I wanted to say about Hinduism. There's a lot more to say. I don't want to make it sound like that's all there is to Hinduism. Certainly, there's way more to it than that. But we've got a lot of religions we've got to cover. Next is Jainism, which I'm going to try to knock out in just one single video. I think I can do that. It's a pretty short chapter. And then after that, we'll spend at least 2, maybe 3 of these video lectures going over Buddhism. And so that's what's coming up next. I hope you can join me for that. As always, thank you for sticking around till the end of this video. And I hope to see you all on the other side. Cheers.